It's the boogeyman, networking. Not the wrestler with the worms coming out of his mouth. No, I'm talking about automation. That's right, that thing that's been coming for your job for 6 years now. Yeah, well, okay, this year is either the year of VDI, the year of IPv6, or the year that automation takes my job. Take your pick and you're gonna be wrong all 3 times.
What about the year of the Linux and desktop?
Yeah, we've given up on that. But yeah, we haven't given up on IPv6 yet. But more importantly, it's interesting when we look at automation, the way that we're doing things. And part of this is come by the fact that we're having a great discussion with Arista earlier about ChatGPT. And depending on when you watch this, because it's January of 2023, you're either laughing at me because I'm referring to something as archaic as that, or ChatGPT actually has taken over the world, in which case I welcome our new weird talking AI overlords. But more importantly, we look at all of the focus that's being put into automation right now, and as has been brought up around the table, specifically by Jordan Martin over here, we're burning a lot of cycles on something that actually may not be around much longer. A transitional phase, to borrow a term from evolution, that weird hybrid animal that, that swims and crawls on land before we actually get to a point where evolution kind of takes its natural course. So the idea for this whole topic is you're all doing automation wrong, or at least you're focusing on the wrong thing. So Jordan, I actually want you to develop this just a little bit because you kind of came up with this idea. What do you see that people are doing wrong with automation right now?
I don't know that I would frame it as that we're doing it wrong.
Oh no, I would.
Yeah.
He wants
I
clicks.
would.
He wants clicks.
No, we need the clickbait title, right? But I think that the challenge right now is that, we're kind of in this phase where it's the wild, wild west. Everyone's kind of developing their own solutions. I don't think that that is sustainable or long-term or whatever. I think that we're going to land somewhere in the middle because I think that automation historically has come from the vendor. If there's any automation at all, that's the only place you could get it. Then we started opening it up, the idea that hey, we want open standards, we want it to be accessible. Everyone's out there writing Python scripts, using Ansible, doing all kinds of fun things to, try to automate their networks. And I think we're in that phase where we have discovered that while that's possible, the operational complexities, we're just trading them. We're trading operational complexities of running a network versus the operational complexities of automating a network. Yeah. And I think the real value from automation is controller-based control of networks. Now the question of whether that's open or closed or vendor, I think is up in the air, but I think that automation will play a role in our networks as we go forward, but I don't think it's going to play a role in the way that, there's lots of people out there learning to code, which is not a bad level of effort. I don't want to sound like I'm discouraging people from learning how to do those things because they're important skills, but I don't think networkers are going to be coders in 5 or 10 years. I don't think that's the way it's going to work. I think having an understanding about the way the systems work is good, because that's how we're going to be interacting with our networks, but it's going to be through tools that were written by people who know how to program.
It's also tricky. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, David. My main issue around automation isn't with automation on the face of it. I think it's in the messaging. What you hear about automation is it's great. You can automate your network. You don't have to do all the manual clicks that you have to do every day. But what I think gets left out is the underlying design. Network design is a big component of it. Automating a network is very hard when all of your devices are configured in different ways.
Yes.
And I think that isn't brought to light when we're talking about automation. I'm a firm believer in you first really should get back to basics and get your house in order, have those standards before you can automate it, because otherwise you're going to blow up complexity.
Well, you cannot automate it if it's not repetitive. What's the point of doing that?
What's the point?
Yeah, and also on top
this was not sold as it's going to be something I can use if I fix things. It's going to fix everything for me. Yeah. I bought it on that. And also, CEO signed off on that check. It's going to fix everything.
And that's another topic, because I have actually 2 things that came to my mind. One of them is, when you talk about automation, there is no common agreement unless you only say Python, and even some people might disagree, because then there are so many techniques and tools that you can use that everybody feels they are holding the only truth. And then, I'm an automation expert. What do you do? I only do Python. Then the other person says, I only do Ansible. The other person says, I do Chef or whatever other tool is. And the other person then says, oh no, well, we do automation, but we just have the pre-configure books, run books, and then we just apply them in the network thing. What is the real scope of automation at this point? Because there are so many tools, and you would not be able to learn all of them. That's nonsense. And also, another thing that came to my mind minutes ago was, okay, fine, now you have automation, because it is always sold to you as the engineer is going to be overpowered, is going to do everything, solve all the problems, this panacea thing. Now, what happens when, fine, by the engineer, but then the company says, cool, but I'm not going to compromise my availability and stability because you want to automate something. You have what? Service providers that would never give you all the power in the world to do stuff, because you can bring an entire continent just because you missed something or you had a blank space or whatever. Are they going to take that risk? Probably not.
Do they take it now?
No,
I mean, and
You
that's
sure about that?
not all of them.
There is no way for anybody in a service provider network to take down a whole continent with a typo.
You think?
Do you think?
Yeah, I think there's still, I think there are still sensitive places in the network.
And so, and this is a problem that we get at. And I remember there was a post that was made, I think it was on the SolarWinds Thwack forums, about a guy who was going to go in and automate the deployment of an image for, I think it was an AP or a switch, I forget what it was, but it was a lot of things. It was something like 500 devices. And when he went to do the first automation, it wouldn't accept the tarball to put the OS on the switch. So what he did was he forced it. And then he did it, and it looked like it worked. And so then he kicked off the script. And by the time it finished, he realized that he had overwritten the entire switch, and it wasn't going to reboot because the OS had been completely corrupted. That was an automation problem caused by a person who didn't do the automation right. I can still cause a global BGP catastrophe with a bad command. Does that mean that I'm worse off than automation? Because I promise you that there are people looking at this going, the reason why I want to automate this process is because it now has guardrails. It now does input validation. Did you mean to type 40,000? Because that's the wrong unit for that command switch. It should have been 40, because it's not in bits per second, it's in kilobits per second.
I saw that live.
But to that point, and I've talked about this just because it's me, especially getting my feet wet the last year and a half, 2 years or so, automation, learning, home labbing and whatnot. To take on that point, not every environment's going to be the same, right? You're going to have multiple pieces of gear, different configurations. So it's a use case thing. And I've always said this, it's how you proposition yourself to the client or customer. Casual, hey, are you automating your devices right now and so forth? Maybe scaling it as starting with a proof of concepts. Take 3 devices in like a lab setting and like you show them something maybe, but build it out small, because like you said, pushing it to 500 different devices is going to wipe it out. That's like, I'm more of the start small, work your way up to something big. If you're not sure and you're not testing it enough, then yeah, I mean, those instances are going to happen.
Yeah, but also, what's automation for you? Because for some people, automation isn't just going to put a bunch of commands in many boxes at the same time. But what if you have a bigger task and then you didn't bother validating the input?
Yeah.
And, oh, my bad, I just broke the QoS policies.
I think we may have over-rotated on automation. We've got all kinds of people with 0 network experience, and they're learning Terraform, they're learning Python.
Sorry.
Right?
So that's the tips.
And so,
start with the foundational stuff.
Sure, human error is the main cause of any network outage. But then when we automate that human error into it, we can take out, like you said, an entire global system. So I think we have to be really, really careful.
Yeah.
I think it makes more sense for network engineers to learn automation than take somebody who has learned automation with no network experience.
So there's a little bit of context that's required there. I know I shouldn't automate this process because the blast radius capability is much larger than I anticipate. Or conversely, that script doesn't look right. It's missing something. And I need to do a little bit more effort because I know that when I did this by hand, I really should have been working on this. But I also think that there's another issue, and Jordan, I'm kind of curious, not just you, but the rest of this. A lot of what automation is looking to solve are not problems that everybody has. I remember when Jeremy Schulman was showing me the magic of being able to use Puppet to turn up new switches. You get the device MAC address or you get the device serial number, you plug it in, it phones home, it uses all these DHCP switches, and it automatically configures itself. And you're like, it is wonderful. And I said, you're right, it is. And I'm going to deploy 3 switches this year. I am automating a problem that doesn't need to be automated, because we all have that coworker who spends 8.5 hours writing a Python script to do something that could have been accomplished in 20 minutes. And when you ask them, they're like, but the next time I have to do it, it'll be automated. You're right. When are you going to do it again? July? Yeah, like legitimately, we kind of, to Rita's point, we have spent so much time pushing the frameworks, pushing the thing. It's like someone who wants to get into furniture making, and they're like, okay, what tools do I need to do to make a simple pine bench for my front porch? Oh, well, you need a pocket screw jig, and you need a bandsaw, and you need this thing from the Snap-on truck that you're going to spend 8 years paying for. But this is the only way to build furniture. I'm telling you, it's on my TikTok.
Probably David knows.
David, is that true?
David?
It's true. It's true.
But exactly kind of this point, because it is a little bit of a crossover. You can accomplish a lot with a very small tool set.
Yeah.
But it doesn't scale to like becoming, Ethan Allen. You can't build like an entire furniture factory with, an old screwdriver and a hammer, right?
I can make a chair with hand tools, but it's going to take me maybe 2 weeks versus power tools or something.
Right. But once you have the power tools and you have the process down to build the furniture, to Rita's point, you understand where the challenges are and when I should use the table saw versus where I should use something a little bit smaller, coping saw or something like that, because this is a little bit more fine detail and requires a little bit more attention. But we have been pushing the table saw. We have been pushing the power tools. We have been pushing the do more things faster, because that's what makes automation sexy. Look at me, I can configure 10,000 devices in one afternoon. Wrong.
That's a
I
historical
think it's a use case thing too. Like I've had a friend who's, he's one of 2 or maybe 3 at most network engineers, right? He's given a project to deploy 3,000 switches. I think it's a time constraint thing too. Like if he doesn't have the bandwidth, it's a use case.
Hold on. Your friend is one of 3 network engineers, and they tasked him to deploy 3,000
So that was one instance, but him and I think it was the rest of his team, but they were just so bogged down with other work that he learned.
And they were bogged down with more work, because
It's a kamikaze mission.
this points to another problem of automation, that we're using software to replace people, but not in a way that makes sense.
Like they didn't force him to use automation. He was looking into ways to
I know why he was looking at automation, because he did the math and he figured out that if he had to deploy 3,000 switches, even at 10 minutes each, he's still going to waste how many months of his life just doing configuration.
Right.
But if he'd have gone to the boss and said, it's going to cost me $50,000 to write the script for this automation, can I hire an engineer to help me? Nope. I don't want to increase my headcount. So people are looking for low cost, low effort solutions to replace protein robots in the company.
I feel like we're having the wrong conversation in a way. Going back to something Jordan said near the top of this session. We're talking about using tools to push configuration. I don't want to think about configuration. I want like the SD-WAN model, where I put my device on the wire, it phones home to the controller, it gets a policy push to it, and it's done. That's automation to me.
Yeah, do we need to define? 'Cause
Okay.
we have abstraction, orchestration, and automation.
There are too many constraints and layers there. It's a bit more
Because
complicated.
To your point, Ethan, the pushing configuration and handling that day-to-day stuff, I see that more as an abstraction thing and running scripts and that kind of thing. You're talking about the full end-to-end automation.
I'm talking about
base.
where we want to get to me,
Right.
where we should be getting to.
Yeah, there are
Industry
differences.
and not
it's
just
different.
Python's cool, man. I think half the reason we spend time with all these tools as network engineers is because they're fun.
Yeah.
Not because
But it's
they're
not automated.
where we need to get to as an industry.
AJ, did you have a point you wanted to
And ultimately, where we want to get is going to be automating remediation efforts. If we see a link goes down over a period of time, and all we have to do is flap the link, do that in an automated fashion. I know is an example a lot of vendors like to use, but I think clearly defining what automation means would be helpful.
So I love the idea that you just put out there, Ethan. What I want to do is I want to sit down at a computer and I want to put my intent on paper and have the system take care of the rest, right? That's top-down automation to me.
Mhm.
I am focused on the end result. The problem is that a lot of us, through our careers, are working from the bottom up. We're worried about the means. We're worried about the process that needs to happen in order for that to be accomplished. And we do. We lose sight of the forest for the trees more often than we need to. But in part, it's because we're overly worried about simplifying that complexity to a point where someone who isn't us can do it. Whereas someone who isn't us will just look at the system and go, I type the words in and the thing happens. Can we bridge that gap? Is automation the way to bridge that gap?
Yes, and we're going to, whether we like it or not. Like that's where we're headed. Yes. So to Ethan's point, that's kind of what I was insinuating, is that this whole idea of ad hoc automation where people are writing scripts, it's good and it's healthy and all those things right now, because as an industry, we're learning how to, interface with our network and with our equipment through an automated means, but it's not the end result.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it's not the end result is a couple of things. One, I don't think that networkers are going to become good enough programmers to be able to make that happen at the scale that we need it to happen and at the complexity that our networks are being built at to make that a consistent experience. And the other thing I say is we look at this entire environment with rose-colored glasses. So if we look at the orchestration tools that exist today for networks that are prescriptive and incredibly well-defined, written by people who are programmers, and how many bugs and how much garbage we have to deal with those controllers, and those are the people who know what they're doing, I'm not going to be able to get there. Like me as a networker, I'm not going to be able to build that system. So me going and learning Python is not going to get me to that end result. Now me learning Python or whatever, and you forgot the holy religion of Go, by the way, in your list of...
Sorry.
We're still doing Go. We moved to Rust.
Sorry.
Well, Rust, yes.
Forgive me for what I have seen.
But going and learning those things, I don't think is a problem. It's not the end goal. The end goal is an orchestrated system. The end goal is to say that you can have that intent-based network, which is a term I absolutely despise, but that's where you were getting at, right?
And we've moved past it because now it's AI ops now, right? Like
Sure.
that's what.
Right.
And the term's going to change much faster than the components that we do,
That's
because
absolutely
that's
right.
literally washing another coat of paint on it.
That's correct.
But let me pose this argument kind of to what you're saying about you as a network engineer, or the average network engineer is never going to need to learn Python to do their jobs. Could it be that the reason why we wanted those folks to learn Python was to take the skills that they had in this bottom-up organization and insert them into the hive mind, if you will, of you know how to do the task. I need you to learn how to write us code that will make the task work with the system over here, so that the CIO, when they log into their version of the dashboard and I can type the command to do the thing, that your code executes to show them what they would have asked you to dig up anyway.
So I'm going to push back a bit. I never said you should learn how to code. I've been very intentional about the fact that I think it's valuable for this very reason, because we have to interface with people who are programmers.
Yes. There's a difference between need and should.
Right.
Do you need to be a programmer? No.
No.
Should you be a programmer? Yes.
I would say, do you need to spend some time learning how to speak the language of coders? And I think the answer to that question for every networker is yes. I think you have to learn to speak the language. I'm not saying you have to be a great programmer. I'm not saying you have to be able to do all that stuff.
Oh, good.
But you have to be able to communicate with the people who are going to be doing it. When you talk with your vendor 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about programmatic access to our equipment.
Yes.
And if I want to communicate to TAC, I'm going to be talking about programmatic access to my equipment. Like this, the CLI is not dying, but the CLI is changing in its scope. We're going to use it for troubleshooting, but we're not going to be using it for config. You're going to be using controllers a lot more. How many controllers have we seen at field day here already, right? This is the way things are going, which means that the OEMs, the vendors, are interacting with the equipment programmatically. And if you can't speak that language with them, you're going to get left behind eventually.
Well, I think the other point on that too is we need to be able to understand that different methods of management and operations, because there is no benefit to trying to automate a suboptimal process, right? The way we as humans interact with a piece of device, we have a way that we would do it, the way we're thinking through it. And that doesn't translate necessarily to the way that we would program it. So the value that we bring is understanding what does the network need to do? What are the different services, protocols that need to be configured? We then either need to have an understanding of the programmatic methods, or at least be able to articulate them to somebody well, so that they can think of what is the right way of doing that, not necessarily trying to just do the way we would have done it on the CLI as a system.
So it's interesting that you bring up this whole idea of the way that we programmatically access systems and things like CLIs and stuff like that, because I don't know if you are Exchange admins. No, you're not.
I don't think anybody would say that they are.
Years ago, have you guys looked at the latest version of Exchange recently?
Nope.
You know why? because nobody operates Exchange anymore. And more importantly, the latest version of Exchange is a collection of PowerShell scripts in a trench coat.
Yep.
The GUI for Exchange literally exists to make PowerShell calls.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of system that you can't access through the GUI. You have to create your own PowerShell scripts. Just like the latest versions of Windows servers, good luck finding a command prompt.
We've done
because Microsoft moved to the PowerShell method, which gives them a lot more flexibility in the way that they interact with the system. I mean, you can even get a version of Windows servers that doesn't have a GUI on it, which 2012 me considers that heresy. But the fact is, yeah, back when I actually used to do things for a living. But importantly, you can't interact with those servers if you don't understand the language, which in this case is PowerShell. So your average Windows admin is actually a PowerShell admin that knows how to use a mouse.
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier on in some of our sessions today, that the different user interfaces that network OEMs are producing for their tooling is really just a wrapper to an API, and they've helped try and spur on the reskilling of resources in terms of you can look at what's actually getting generated behind the scenes and try and understand the programmatic methods to be able to then generate those yourself and not be dependent on the UI. I think going back to some of the things we talked about earlier, though, where we see the industry going, what the business wants to get from automation, Ethan's example of I just want to be able to plug something in and it does its job. I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but that's almost leading back to network as a service.
Yeah.
Because I don't see enterprises, even the large ones, having the skill set, the budget, the time to build that themselves.
Unless it's a differentiator.
Unless it's a differentiator.
Exactly.
And if you're watching this video on YouTube, note that there was a discussion that we had before this talking about network as a service. And one of the things that came up in that discussion was that one of the reasons why network as a service is so powerful for organizations that are offering it is because you will buy what's on the truck. You get this network and it will be done like this. And you don't get all these bells and whistles that turn you from an ice machine into a snowflake. I would argue that the reason why you're going to get what's on the truck and nothing else is because the way that network as a service makes sense is to have automation deploy it.
That's right.
I mean, I can remember back when I actually did this for a living. I know it felt so long ago. IBM had the Blade Center, right? Remember that thing? It sounded like a freight train and a hurricane taking off, and it had all these modules in it. And I can remember going on site with people to deploy it, and they're server people. And you know what their automation script for the network switch was? Copy this out of Notepad and paste it in here. And I had to fix a lot of those things because it was a cookie cutter script that never worked. And I maintain to this day, there was one Blade Center. I still don't know how it was talking to the network. I just know that packets showed up where they were supposed to. But that kind of automation at that scale where it makes sense because your resources are finite and expensive. And if you are an organization that wants to cut your costs, you're looking at getting rid of people. You're looking at reducing your headcount. And ways to do that include automation and include outsourcing what you do. Well, guess what? If it takes a person to configure a network in your organization, if you have Cisco or Juniper or Nile or whoever do it, it's still going to take a person on their end to do it too, and they don't want to hire that person either. So they're going to want to use an automation script to deploy this, and it just so happens that, we're not going to name your VLANs because that's not in the scope. So is automation kind of that gateway drug, if you want to call it that, to network repeatability, network consistency, and getting rid of snowflakes, not because of the automation itself, but the fact that automation just doesn't allow us to do those things anymore.
I think if you're looking at network provisioning, network operations, then yes, that's why we were having the conversation earlier. We got to have consistency, repeatability, and in architectures, topology, so that we can automate. And whether it's an enterprise or a network as a service provider, they're going to need that be somewhat prescriptive in order to build that automation and do it at scale. I do think that there's still a place for automation outside of that for organizations today where they're wanting to look at automation to pull together or connect disparate systems, whether that is for provisioning, where we've seen it higher up the stack with applications and virtual machines or whatever, or even within network operations. I mean, I've got customers that are doing things like a ticket gets opened by an individual. We're pulling that individual's account from Active Directory. We're querying it with a CMDB to find out what workstation they're on, what's the MAC address, what's the port that's on, and let's pre-stage the ticket with a lot of helpful information for the operations team. That type of value of automating a task that would have taken a lot of time repeatedly from a level 1 NOC operator, I think brings value to the business. I don't see personally as much value in what I think we see a lot of proprietary solutions going after, which is greenfield deployments that happens once, right?
True.
There are no more greenfields.
Yeah.
The thing is that it makes me think when you were talking about this, it makes me think that this old expression everybody brings when you're told that, okay, so why are you doing a CCIE? Why are you doing anything like this? And then they say, okay, so is it about the goal or this is about the journey and a means to get somewhere? Because then the question is going to be automation your goal, or is going to be one of these things you have to go through so you get to whatever the goal is? And to know that, then you need to know what the goal is. And I don't think we know, because it's all about this short term satisfaction. I want to get this done, and then so what's going to happen after? Where's the vision?
David, you are such a dreamer because nobody that's deploying this has a goal. You know what their goal is?
Money.
Shareholder value.
That's money. That.
Yeah. Ultimately, it is.
You're
but
saying
I
the same
kid you
thing.
not.
It sounds very
The only
cute.
vision that these people have is 3 months long. The next quarterly report, as long as the stock price goes up, I don't care what we do. And unfortunately, for all of us, that's not enough vision to actually make these kinds of transformative things. And we've seen it time and time again that we are making decisions for short-term gain, cutting off our nose to spite our face, whether it's automation, network as a service, hardware deployment, licensing challenges, or what have you, that ultimately make us want to throw up our hands. Because we don't need 3 months. We need 6 months. We need 3 years. We need to turn this ship. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a bunch of rowboats.